Hello, my friends. My name is Kathy Myhre, and I am a licensed mental health therapist in Washington State, and I have a Christian counseling practice in Snohomish. I'm good friends of Pastor Tim and Anna, and I served for 10 years as a Foursquare pastor down in Everett. So I'm going to talk to you today about the emotion of sadness. And like every other emotion, sadness is a normal human experience. And like every other emotion, sadness is like a color. It has different shades. So everyone feels, feelings of melancholy from time to time, sadness, all the way to grief and clinical depression, which I'll talk to you about in a few minutes. So sadness is not a character deficiency or an indication of a lack of faith. It's just a normal human response. And there can be many things that trigger sadness in us. Stress can be a huge trigger if you are just burning the candle at both ends for a long period of time. Your system may get sad just because you're not taking in enough refreshment. And if we don't watch it and pay attention, we can develop symptoms of clinical depression. Changes, losses, disappointments can all trigger sadness. Even relationship conflict, especially if we have attachment or interpersonal trauma in our childhoods. And so the important thing with sadness is that any emotion that's generalized is more overwhelming. So with emotions like sadness, we want to get sharper edges. So when people come into my office and they're feeling sad, I might ask them a question like, what do you think this sadness is about? And if they say, I have no idea, I'll say, well, what's your best guess? And I might hear something along the lines of, wow, I just drove my daughter to college, and I guess it's affecting me more than I realized. And, empty nest is a thing. We don't talk enough about empty nest, and especially for a woman who is a stay-at-home mom. It's not just loss, but it's also a job change, right, in some degrees. Or I might hear something like, my friends and I are going to a concert at the Gorge that we go to every year. And one of our friends has been diagnosed with cancer, and he's in aggressive chemo, and he's not going with us. And so we want to move toward the sadness and put our hands right where we feel it and acknowledge, oh my gosh, that is a sad thing, isn't it? And allow yourself to feel it. Maybe if I have someone in my office who's grieving the loss of a loved one and they're feeling sad and they're saying, I'm just missing them, I might say, well, what specific aspect of your relationship or that person are you missing right now? And I might have a young woman who recently put her hands on her belly. She's 5 months pregnant, and she said, it's just occurring to me, her mom had died 2 years before, that my baby isn't going to have a relationship with one of her grandmas, and my mom would have loved to be here for me. And then I might say, can you imagine how your mom would be with this baby? And if you could honor your sadness now, what would that look like? And perhaps my, young woman missing her friend at the concert might say, one of the things he would do at the concert is on Saturday morning after everybody's been drinking too much, Friday night, he'd get up early and make sausages and bacon and eggs and pancakes, and everybody, there would be smelling it. And then he would insist everybody get up and eat the breakfast. And she would start laughing about the moans and groans of people. And she goes, you know what? I think that's the way I want to honor him. I want to take over the breakfast this year until he can get better. Or maybe my young griever will say, you know what, I want to start making videos talking to my child before life gets too busy about my mom because she's still in my head. And so we want to move toward the sadness. We want to honor it. And so, for those of you who grieve, sadness is a normal response to grieving. And I want to say a couple things about grieving. And the first thing is it lasts a lot longer than we think it will. And I can almost promise you that your friends and family members will move on way before you are able to move on. And so if you take your time to move toward the feelings instead of numbing them out, instead of suppressing them, instead of staying so busy that you can't attend to them. God's already created our systems with the amazing ability to grieve well. All you need to do is engage in the process. And if you don't, that grief will get stuck. And it will be triggered later, with each subsequent loss. It just accumulates and accumulates. And so like with any emotion, if we bury it alive. And it can wreak havoc on our system. Now, after COVID, we experienced a phenomenon around the world where people were experiencing a season of what we would call languishing. And languishing is not to the degree of clinical depression. Languishing is kind of about life, where we were so isolated that we've gotten into patterns of binge watching TV, of just staying home and not going to movies or dinners. And it just took a while to reboot the system, to engage again. And some of us are still needing a reboot. And so get on out there, because one of the most important things we need when we're feeling sad is community and relationship. But not just any, relationships where we're seen and we're known. So I want to talk about clinical depression. It's very important. So while sadness is normal, clinical depression is a medical illness. Just like any other medical illness, the only difference is the organ affected is your brain. And so every family system has genetic predispositions. Some of you might have kidney diseases that may run in your family, or you may have high cholesterol that runs in your family. Some family systems are just wired a little bit more for depression and anxiety. But most of the time, depression comes about because of a series of losses or adversities, that have just accumulated. And so any one of us can develop symptoms of clinical depression. And these are symptoms that are so deep that it really affects our functioning. We're not able sometimes to even function in normal ways. Like we might get the kids off for school and then go back to bed. And so the symptoms to look for with clinical depression in men, the primary symptoms are going to be irritability, and outbursts of anger, especially if that's not been normal for you. And then a symptom that we call anhedonia. And anhedonia is a loss of get up and go. It means that the things in life that you used to draw pleasure from and meaning from, you no longer draw pleasure and meaning from. And so it tanks your motivation. You may isolate. There can be symptoms of crying, and I don't know why. There can be symptoms of just deep sadness and clinical depression we can feel in our bodies. Sometimes our bodies will ache with fatigue, and we can have, back aches, neck aches, headaches. There might be disturbances in our sleep. So an average adult needs 7 to 9 hours of sleep. If you're sleeping more than that, you could be getting depressed, or an inability to sleep, weight gain, weight loss. And in clinical depression, it's like our brains are not functioning well. It's like our brain is functioning at a much lower processing speed. It's like for those of us old enough to know when, to be adults when the internet first came into being, it's like the old AOL dial-up, It's like it just takes a while for your brain to boot, and so you might feel cloudy. You are not processing information. You might be functioning at work at a much, lower, like 60%. For clinical depression, you have to have symptoms that really affect your functioning for at least 2 weeks. But a lot of the people that I work with have that lower level chronic depression, which almost always is related to earlier childhood stuff like neglect, not nurtured well, or losses that were not really dealt with. And so with clinical depression, there can be dark thoughts, and most commonly feelings of hopelessness, or the feelings that the world would be better off without me, or I have no purpose. And if you're having symptoms like that, I am so sorry that you're feeling that way. And I want you to know that over 50 million people annually in the U.S. are experiencing symptoms of depression. And depression is very treatable. So please get help, especially if you're having any suicidal thoughts or thoughts of not wanting to be here. That's an indication that your brain has gotten sick, and your brain can get healthy again. So in closing, I wanted to share with you some quick little resources and, for sadness. And the first thing is that, research has shown that if you can get out of the house and take a walk in the morning before 10 a.m., as little as 15 minutes, studies show that there are significantly less levels of depression. There's something about that morning sun and starting the day off with something productive like that. 2 little journaling exercises I'll give to people will be at night before you go to bed. Have a little journal next to your bed and write down before you go to sleep 3 things that went well that day. Because our brains have a negativity bias and holds on to negative stuff much stronger than positive. Maybe you've noticed that. All of our brains are wired that way. And then during the day, the gratitude journal, writing 3 things every day that you're grateful for. And this can really anchor your brain in the positive. Now, some resources is there's a wonderful podcast called The Happiness Lab by Dr. Laurie Santos at Yale University that has some really good practical tips. The CDC just came out with a report yesterday that said that they found 40% of teens in this country report significant feelings of sadness. And so a lot of that is related to social media, which has disconnected us and not connected us. And so a website called AuthenticHappiness.org. One of my favorite books by Brennan Manning called Abba's Child, The Cry of the Heart for Intimate Belonging. So these are some resources I hope you'll try, and be gentle with yourself. I love you, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.